I worked in a factory a few years ago. I had the night shift, which was very quiet, and there were at most 5 of us in the area. To avoid getting bored or falling asleep, we would chat, play music, or tell horror stories. Juan always excelled at the latter because he knew how to keep us hooked with his ghost and apparition tales, ending them with great jokes that brightened our night and made it much more enjoyable. But there was one occasion when we faced a downpour that seemed endless. It was so intense that the company owner told us that just the 2 of us covering the area would be more than enough since there wouldn't be much activity. So that night it was just the 2 of us. I noticed Juan was much more serious than usual. I was the one he got along with the most, so I immediately dismissed the idea that he felt uncomfortable or anything like that because it was just us. Juan wasn't doing what he usually did. He barely talked, wasn't singing along with me, just worked silently with a lost look in his eyes. I jokingly asked him what was going on, and he just said he was tired. I wasn't going to let a long night pass by, so I tried to cheer him up and said, "Come on, tell a scary story." He looked at me intently and, in a very serious voice that I hadn't heard from him before, said, "You won't believe me." "Go ahead," I replied. It was at that moment I noticed his gaze. He seemed deeply worried and very nervous. He started rubbing his hands, cracking his fingers as he said, "It's just that some time ago, quite a while actually, we visited my grandmother. She lived near Montemorelos and Allende, over in Monterrey, Nuevo León. The whole family would gather there during vacations because there are very beautiful places to visit. One of my cousins decided we should conduct a paranormal investigation. So, it was easy for us to be unsupervised by our uncles and head to a river near my grandmother's ranch to see if we could find La Llorona and record her for our childhood project. Around that ranch there is absolutely nothing except that river. The nearest neighbor would be approximately 2 blocks away from the ranch. To get to where we would search for La Llorona, we walked along some trails and crossed many more of them. My younger cousin Robertito mentioned he had seen a haunted house from the roof of my grandparents' house, which made it much more interesting for us, so we headed there. After walking for a while we finally arrived and saw it. It was a very, very large estate about the size of a block or even larger. It only had one path leading to the main gate, which looked completely deserted. It seemed abandoned for quite some time. The walls of the place were very high. Even standing on top of each other we couldn't reach the top, so we kept looking for another entrance by circling it. We walked a short distance through the bushes and thorns until we reached the back of the estate, where we found a hole in the wall. That hole seemed like it was meant for pipes or something similar, so it was very small. My older cousins wouldn't fit. Only Robertito and I could enter. I struggled a bit, but I managed. The plan was for Robertito and me to enter, take a quick look around the estate, record, and then leave. Once inside and after exploring a bit, we reached a courtyard with a few lights. The decorations, the walls, everything was very luxurious inside. We followed a path with tiles and very strange shapes that I honestly couldn't describe. And around it, there was a well-kept garden with some very peculiar statues that made me feel very uneasy, in addition to the fear they provoked. My cousin kept walking while I remained distracted and simultaneously fascinated by the shapes of those statues. As we turned the corner, we arrived at a large house on the other side of the garden. There, we saw it was decorated with torches arranged in a circle. I can't quite explain what it was. It looked like a dog but larger than usual. It seemed flattened. And next to it, I think it was a person because I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be hands. The entire floor was covered in blood. I couldn't quite make out the shape of everything there. Honestly, I was almost certain it was a person and an animal. But I repeat, everything was flattened. The skin was all smeared with blood, everything mixed together. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared. I couldn't even move. I didn't realize it, but my cousin kept walking and they saw him. At this point, Juan's voice was breaking a lot. He looked very pale. He stopped what he was doing and began to tremble. He sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall, while he put his head between his legs and covered it with his hands. It seemed like he was pulling his hair, repeatedly asking himself why. I got scared, of course, and helped him up to sit on a chair, brought him water, and asked why that had happened to him. I honestly thought he had a panic attack or something similar since he was known for using marijuana, but we could tell when he had used it because of the smell or his appearance, but this wasn't the case. There was no smell or anything to indicate he had smoked. After a little while he told me they got my cousin. At this point, I really wanted him to finish the story as always with one of his jokes, but he continued telling me just as nervous. I managed to run in fear. The only thing you can do is run. I got out of the hole and my cousins asked me about Robertito and the phone and I just said, let's go. I didn't stop running through the woods and those trails, not even to see if they were following me. I couldn't stop running. I arrived without stopping after about 10 minutes at the ranch and woke everyone up. I told them, and no adult believed me until about 10 minutes later when my other cousins arrived and told them. When I got out of the hole, people from the estates came out and moved in their trucks. My cousins also ran after seeing all this. My grandfather, who was already very old, got up when he heard everything we were saying. He told my uncles to get in the truck. And only one aunt and uncle got us all into another car and we left. My dad, along with my other uncles and my grandfather, went somewhere else. And from there, I didn't know anything more. When we got home, I didn't see my cousins again. He paused briefly and continued telling me. Until now, I hadn't fully understood what happened that time. I had somewhat forgotten or tried to forget, I'm not sure, but the memories came back. My mom told me that near my grandfather's ranch they had found mass graves with bodies, and it was very likely that Robertito's body was there. She told me that after all this, my aunt went to report my cousin's disappearance because my uncles hadn't found him that night. And when she filed the report, the authorities immediately went out to search for him. About 3 days later they called my aunt. According to her, the officers told her that the best thing she could do was to forget everything. That the family should separate and each go their own way. And if possible, move house or leave the state of Nuevo León. Apparently because an officer told my aunt that Robertito wasn't coming back, that he was no longer with us, and the best thing we could do for him was to get a priest to pray for his soul so he could rest. My mom told me that my grandmother abandoned her ranch. She didn't even have time to sell it. We also moved houses. My mom also told me that the place we had entered was an estate of satanic drug traffickers, who reportedly performed rituals with sacrifices, and that was very likely my cousin's fate. She also mentioned that these people were very powerful and could easily find us. But she assured us that she didn't give anyone any information about our family. So, in that regard, we could be at ease. It's only now that I realize I abandoned my cousin. He would be 18 years old now, and honestly, I don't know how to react. I feel paralyzed. They don't even know if his body is there because there are many corpses, most of them children. After everything Juan told me that night, it was very difficult for me to return to work. Very difficult to try to go about it normally. When I got home, I hugged my family like never before. I never learned more about the subject. I never saw Juan again. He didn't return to work, and I didn't have the courage to ask anyone about him. The whole experience left a deep mark on me, and I often find myself thinking about Robertito and the unimaginable pain one must have endured. It's a story that haunts me to this day, reminding me of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places.